Hello and welcome back to the Football Snapshot. I'm Lewis Nolan and Liverpool playing on Saturday against Crystal Palace in a game that I think Liverpool could win because Crystal Palace, as much as they're a very strong defensive team, because you actually look at the Premier League table, apart from Arsenal, they've conceded the second fewest goals, they've conceded 36 times, and they've already beaten us 4 times. But you have to factor in that Oliver Glasner, he has Crystal Palace safe, and I know that they're technically not too far away from the European spots, but at the same time, they're going to be preparing for a European semi-final against Shakhtar Donetsk in on Thursday. The first leg's going to be played on Thursday. So, I mean, Crystal Palace's season will pretty much be defined by whether they win the Conference League, and it doesn't mean that the season won't necessarily be successful because, like I said, they could be competing for a European spot by the end of the season in the final few games. But I would not be surprised if changes were made, or certainly we saw some starters. If they start the game, I would be very surprised if they finish the game because people like Adam Wharton, they're sort of, he picked up an injury recently, whether it's minor or not, we'll see. But it's going to be really close. And Lacroix too. So it's going to be a game where the game on the weekend against Liverpool, I don't think will be the priority for Oliver Glasner, and nor should it be, by the way, because he's already an FA Cup winning manager. So why wouldn't he believe that he could win another trophy with them? And if he was to leave Crystal Palace at the end of the season, because remember, his contract's expiring. If he was to leave Crystal Palace at the end of the season as an FA Cup winning manager, winning their first ever European trophy as well. And I know people will say it's the Conference League, but this is a big deal because Crystal Palace, they would then get into the Europa League and, the access to finances. Maybe they'll be able to attract more players. But generally for the fans, I mean, we saw that Leicester were relegated to League One recently, but I did see Gary Lineker talk about how Leicester, if you had told fans that, they would win the Premier League, they'd win the FA Cup, they'd go to the quarterfinals of the Champions League, they'd have two fifth place finishes, they would accept being relegated to League One as long as they saw that in their lifetime. And I know that Crystal Palace haven't won the Premier League. I know it's not the same thing, but it's still an incredible journey that they've had with Oliver Glasner. And to be fair, he's had to deal with a lot of upheaval, a lot of players leaving. I mean, Gay, he left in January, but then before that, you had Eze leave in the summer despite playing for Crystal Palace earlier this season. And then you also had Michael Olise leave for Bayern Munich the season before. So he's had to deal with a lot of strife, a lot of, people leaving, but he still managed to build a really competitive squad. And I would back them to win the Conference League, but I'm not sure I'd back them to beat Liverpool because, like I said, even though they've beaten us 4 times this season already, I don't think their focus will be on the game at Anfield. But as for Liverpool, Liverpool's focus, I mean, they're already out of all competitions already. They're not going to win the Premier League. Technically, they can, by the way, because it's mathematically not impossible because Man City and Arsenal are both on 70 points. The maximum amount of points we can get is 70. So, technically, if they lost every game from now until the end of the season, pick them on goal difference. But Liverpool have to get Champions League football, but it does look like Liverpool are because even though teams like Brighton are sixth at the moment, they're only 5 points behind us. They have played a game more than us. And then the team who are seventh, which is Bournemouth, again, they're 6 points behind us, but they played a game more than us. So as much as you can say that things might change in the span of a week, Liverpool could end the weekend 8 points clear of the challengers for top four. And also, Brentford are probably, they're one of the chasing pack. They play Manchester United, and Manchester United are 3 points ahead of us. And even if Brentford win, you might say that the chasing pack are getting closer, but then we'd be close to Manchester United if we won. So, I mean, to be fair, there are aspects of Liverpool's game against Everton that might give me some hope for the game against Crystal Palace, even though, like I said, we have played very poorly against them. But still, I mean, I think that based on the performance against Everton, you have to start Curtis Jones. I would not start him at right back, even though he started against right back against Everton. I would start him in midfield because again, he's deserving of a place over Ryan Gravenberch. He's deserving of a place over Alexis McAllister. And then apart from that, there's not many more choices you could make. You could maybe say, should you start Rio Engamoa versus Cody Gakpo? And obviously, I think Engamoa might have more of an impact, but at the same time, I understand you're easing Engamoa into the team and you might not want to start him all the time. So I understand if Arne Slot goes for Cody Gakpo. So as much as I've criticized him this season, I'm not going to like lose my head over him selecting Cody Gakpo. And Isak is our only fit striker at the moment, and Arne Slot was basically saying how the World Cup in the summer might be really good for Isak because although the games aren't as intense, there's still minutes in his legs. So I think that'll be something that'll be quite good for him. But yeah, I mean, the more minutes Isak gets, the better. But again, I think he had 5 touches before he was subbed off against Everton, so don't expect too much from him. And I don't think any of us are. The season has been a complete write-off. I mean, I've talked to people who've basically said that that's what they were fearing even earlier on in the season. And that's what the season has turned out to be because he's had no impact on the pitch really. But we all know how good he is. So the fitter he can get, the sooner he can get a pre-season, the better. So That's what I'll be looking forward to. So pretty much the only selection choice that I want is obviously I want Salah to start because he's leaving. I wouldn't mind a start for Robertson, but again, I think Kirk has been better than him this season, so I wouldn't. So personally, I go for Kirk, especially until we mathematically secure Champions League football. But yeah, Coach Jones in midfield. Take your pick between Ryan Gravenberch and Lex McAllister because neither deserve to be in the team, like I was saying. Dominic Szoboszlai has to be there. Jeremy Frimpong, I play him right back, and Crystal Palace are probably going to be really difficult to break down defensively, even if they make changes. But at the same time, you know, I still think we should be winning the game. But yeah, we'll see what happens. But in terms of other things related to Liverpool, in the build up to the game, there have been, Arne Slot's been making comments. He's made, I think, a couple that I want to, not pick on, but just like talk about. And one of them is the fact that over the last 8 games, Liverpool picked up 16 points from a possible 24. And that's a basically a 2 points per game record. And to be honest, it's not bad. It genuinely isn't bad because if you look at the top two, Man City and Arsenal, the most amount of points they can get is 85. And if Liverpool maintained a 2 points per game record over an entire season, that would be 76. So it might be, those teams where I always think back to Mourinho under Chelsea when the season where unfortunately Gerrard slipped. But, I always think of them kind of like a distant third, even though they didn't finish that far behind Man City and Liverpool. But I always thought of them as they were never really going to get into the title race, but they were just there. And if Liverpool averaged 2 points per game over an entire season with the current versions of Man City and Arsenal, they would technically be in a title race, but they wouldn't really be, I don't think, threatening to actually win it. But I do take some issue with the people, I've seen people from certain fan media outlets, let's say, I've seen certain people use it as a way to say, oh, Liverpool are improving, because the point about saying Liverpool are improving is that if we're improving, then maybe you can use that as a defensive Arne Slot to say that he should stay on because oh, there are signs that the squad is developing. But I take issue with that because I don't think you can isolate an 8 game period where the average position of the teams that we played was 14th, by the way, because we played Tottenham, we played Wolves, we played Nottingham Forest. Yes, there have been teams like Brighton there, but there's also teams like Fulham. So most of those teams you'd expect us to beat, and even though you wouldn't necessarily expect Liverpool to come through that period without experiencing some difficulties, I don't think I don't think getting 16 points from a possible 24 against those type of teams is something to, rave about. Because if you actually want to, get technical, if you want to go over the last 5 games, Liverpool have only taken 7 points from the last 15, and over the course of the season, that only get you 53 points. So it's not exactly, look, I don't like choosing a specific period of the season and saying, well, if you look at this, then Liverpool are projected to get this, or Liverpool are going to do that, because you have to look at the season as a whole. And of course, you can look at underlying trends, because, for example, during the title winning season, the underlying numbers for Liverpool started to fall off dramatically, I believe around February time, and they've continued to trend downwards since. So you can actually say at part of the season, this part of the season was the most concerning bit because it trended downwards, or this part of the season is trending upwards. So maybe there's something to be positive about. But like I was saying, I don't particularly like doing that in a season where there have been. Have you noticed any particular, things trending up? Because the data to me says they haven't. Because, for example, against PSG, our XG per shot at Anfield was about 0.09. Our XG per shot in the Premier League this season has been about 0.1. So they haven't, even though, Arne talked about the performances against PSG and things like that as something to be positive about, I'm less positive about that. And I'm very concerned about the future of Liverpool because seemingly all the noise from journalists, seemingly all the noise from people, with information about the club is that Arne Slot is going to be manager next season. And he's only got a year left on his contract. And I find that's a really interesting situation because ideally you don't want to go into a summer where your manager has, a year on his contract because then that will mean that new signings, they'll say, oh, who's going to be the manager? Although I'm also not naive enough to believe that, players sign entirely for a manager unless you're probably Pep Guardiola because, who wouldn't want to work under Pep Guardiola? But the point is, it does concern me a little bit. Now, I've seen a couple of theories floated about this. I've seen people say that if Liverpool do decide to keep Arne Slot, it definitely won't be a long-term thing because maybe they want Julian Nagelsmann because he's obviously going to be managing Germany. And if he does manage Germany, there's a chance that he could take them far into the World Cup. But considering the Premier League season starts in August, the World Cup ends in July. he'll need a break. He won't be able to come into the team straight away. So maybe it'll be better to keep Arne Slot in post. Say, do you remember what they did with Brendan Rodgers, where Jurgen Klopp wasn't ready to take the job? They waited a little bit. Jurgen Klopp was ready. They got him in, and the rest is history. I would find that approach very risky, although I do believe that Liverpool could make up any deficit if we started the season poorly under Slot. But something else I will say is that we will not know the truth of whether Arne Slot will be in the job at the end of the season, because I think it is the right approach to like not brief against him, because what would be the point of briefing against him now when Liverpool are the season's been horrible and all the fans are kind of like in a dark place at the moment in time. So having journalists brief against him, having tensions inflamed further, I don't think that's a particularly good thing. And B, Champions League football isn't secured yet. So as long as the Champions League football thing is on the line, I don't think it's a good idea to be saying, "Oh yeah, by the way, we're going to sack Arne Slot at the end of the season," and discussions are taking place with Javi Alonso. But yeah, and also I will also point out in his press conference, Arne Slot did say that he was basically saying that he's not focused on his future; he's only focused on the immediate term. But I did find it kind of interesting how he said that the plan is for me to be here in the short term, and then he said, or in the mid to long term, which is very funny because it's like you haven't exactly given us a clear indication there, Arno, because you're here for the short term, you're here for a little bit, or you're going to be here for the long term. And I think that answer kind of tells you, I don't want to say it tells you everything, but it does give you an insight into the fact that I don't believe people have necessarily, or at least they haven't communicated to Arne Slot whether whether he's 100% going to be here beyond his contract, because they would have given him a new deal, I think, if they had complete confidence in him, because Jurgen Klopp, I think it was 8 months into his first season at Liverpool after Brendan Rodgers got sacked, that they gave him a 6-year deal. So they were very confident in his abilities. But it was very interesting that after Liverpool won the Premier League title, they didn't give Arne Slot a new contract. So all I'm saying is something to keep an eye on. But ahead of the weekend, obviously the only concern for Liverpool and Liverpool fans will be the game against Crystal Palace. And look, things I'll be looking out for: does Curtis Jones play? Where does Curtis Jones play? Does he play in midfield? Does Frimpong play right back? Does Salah play narrow? Does he play really wide? Can Salah be creative? Can we get Salah shots in the box? Who plays left wing? Is it Engamoa? Does Cody Gakpo start as striker potentially if Isak isn't ready to start or if he's not fit enough? Those are the things that I'm going to be looking out for. And I'm going to criticize, I'm going to say things like that. But again, I'll be supporting Liverpool. I want Liverpool to win every game. And I'm going to say, I mean, it would be a dangerous prediction to predict Liverpool to score more than 2 goals. So probably more than 1 goal. But let's say, should I be boring and say another 2-1? I mean, Ismail Assar, I don't remember if he's injured or not, but like he tends to score against us all the time. So let's say 2-1. And let's say Salah hat trick and Isak gets an Anfield goal. How about that? Does Salah hat trick? Salah goal and Isak gets an Anfield goal, yeah. So let's say that. And yeah, we'll see what happens. But thank you for watching the football snapshot. Make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, because I think we're making some progress. And by the way, I'm developing plans to do live streams on this. So keep an eye out, and hopefully there'll be more to come from me in the future. And I'd be very, very pleased and very happy if you would join me in this. But anyway, thanks for listening, and let's see what Liverpool do. Cheers.